Why is Arab colonization ignored compared to Western colonization? I am from Eastern Europe. Historically, one of the biggest colonization event on our minds was Mongolian conquests of 13+ centuries. We don't focus much, yet, on colonialism we did, but I am sure we will soon look more critical on our own history. People always focus more on things from their own history, or more recent. If they speak English, they probably don't live in Arab societies and have no perspective or awareness on it. The real reason is that for 90% of Islamic history, Arabs have not led the Islamic world, but rather generally been subjects of Islamic empires themselves. From 610 AD to around 751 AD, the Islamic world was ruled by the Arabs. But the Abbasid revolt and subsequent Abbasid Empire were Arab only in language and claimed heritage, while most people today just call them an Arab empire. At the time it was very much referred to as a Khorasani revolt. I like to call them the Third Persian Empire, because they thoroughly Persianized Islam. Eventually the religion spread to Central Asia, which changed the world forever. From the early 10th century till around the mid-20th century, the Islamic empires were largely ruled by Turks, Turkish, Turkic Indians, Turkic or African Mamluks, Kurds, Amazigh, etc. Most of the Turkic rulers were separated from their Central Asian motherlands by centuries and decidedly not from Peninsular Arabia. Shah Jahan, the fourth Mughal emperor who built the Taj Mahal, was 12.5% Turkic, 12.5% Persian and 75% Indian Rajput by genetics. It's the last 50 years with Gaddafi, Saddam, Nasser, Hafez and now the Gulf states bidding to lead the Islamic world that we associate Islam with the geopolitical conquest of Arabism, 600 meters Muslims in South Asia, and absolutely nobody thinks of themselves as an Arab colonial victim, because South Asia didn't interact with an Arab Islamic empire in any way for over a millennia. As an Armenian, Assyrian, ask the Arabized Turks. Well, they might deny it, but ask them anyways. It happened in the early 1900s. As an Armenian, this is a great question. Just because something has never been relevant to you, doesn't mean it isn't talked about. Ask the Kurds. Probably due to Western colonization being more recent. It depends highly on the time frame involved, and what colonization meant during that period. For example, no one talks about the African colonization of the Middle East under the Aksumites. But that is because Western society is generally ignorant of the history of various African powers. And also because Aksumite colonization did not look like our modern definition of colonization. Mostly because the US dominates the media landscape so much. The US exports entertainment and news, so it is focused on what that group wants to show. Also, the US is one of a few places you can drag through the mud and the government doesn't imprison you for it. People care about what affects them most. An American cares more about Western colonization since it had an impact on their country. Arab colonization is so far removed from what happens in the West that it gets ignored. Why is Arab colonization ignored compared to Western colonization? Because you live in the West. How often do you peruse Arab-language newspapers, TV, and forums? How do you know that billions of Arab speakers, Mandarin speakers, Hindi speakers, etc., aren't talking about Arab colonization? You personally aren't privy to the conversation. But that doesn't mean the conversation isn't happening. The world is far bigger than the corner of the internet you sit in. If you think they haven't gotten flack for their treatment of Kurds, You must have just woken up from a very long coma. People just ignore the Arab colonization in Africa. There's still problems today from the Arab population and the native African population. A good example is what's happening in Sudan, yet a lot of people seem to ignore that. I wonder why. The simple answer is because they're not white. Most people are talking about post-industrial colonization when they complain about Western colonization. Rome is part of the West. But most people aren't thinking about the Roman Empire or Alexander the Great. The reason is because the most recent is fresher on people's minds and the effects are still immediately felt. It might not be fair, but it's natural and makes sense. This happened over 1,000 years ago. Arabs weren't the only ethnic group at that time that destroyed cultures and forced assimilation, and was common in the Middle Ages. 1. It isn't considered colonization because of the same reason the Germanic expansion into France, Italy, Spain and England isn't. 2. Muslim does not equal Arab. For example, Iraq and Egypt weren't ruled by Arabs for over 1,000 years. 3. The Berber Arab transition happened under Berber rule. Powerful Berber empires. You can look up the second Arab migration into North Africa. 4. Turks does not equal Arab. 5. Persians does not equal Arab. 6. Tuareg does not equal Arab. 7. The Coptic Greek transition in Egypt into Arabic wasn't relatively violent or genocidal. And it's well documented. They do in their regions. But Westerners don't talk about it much because they later colonized them as well. Lol. If it doesn't fit the ideology of slavery only happening to dark-skinned people in America, then it didn't happen. Honestly, it just goes to show that colonization was a normal part of history. Complaining about it and criticizing it from a modern lens where colonization has phased out as civilization evolved is narrow-minded.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epicaricast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.